Let's talk about 5 surprising tricks to help your child learn to love frozen vegetables. Well, the first thing is when you think about frozen, why would we want to do frozen over fresh? Well, simply because fresh isn't always available, especially as we get into these colder winter months. But now's the perfect time to introduce what you have in terms of fresh and show your kids how to freeze them. The benefit of that is you're going to be able to pull out those frozen veggies periodically throughout the year, and they'll understand the process of going from fresh to frozen. So the other thing to consider is that frozen vegetables have a lot of nutrients, and you know what? They're cheap. They're cheap. So pay attention to sales and keep stocking up. But again, if you can find things that are fresh right now that are on sale, buy some extras and get kids involved in the freezing process. So let's specifically talk about those 5 tricks to get these kids eating these vegetables. Well, first of all, we've talked a little bit about starting the freezing process now, but to go into a little bit more on that, the reason why we want to get kids involved from the very start and experience the fresh foods, washing them, drying them off well. You always want to dry them well before you freeze them, by the way, so you don't get a freezer burn. And then chopping and prepping them for bags or glass containers or whatever you like to use is because when kids are involved in that process, they get to experience the vegetable with all of their senses. When we pull vegetables right out of the freezer, you don't get the aroma, you don't get obviously the same feel, and you don't really get the same texture. So we want kids to experience vegetables in a variety of ways. And now that you can get a lot of these things on sale, or if you're like me, taking the last things out of the garden, now's the time to freeze them and get the kids involved in the process of going from fresh to frozen. The other thing you can do is when it does come time to pull that vegetable out of the freezer, remind the kids of that process. Hey, remember when we shucked that corn and we took off all the little kernels and we put them in that bag and then we put them in the freezer? Let's go find that corn and add it to our soup or our casserole or whatever you're happening to make, and see if the kids can find it. In the freezer. All of us have this ideal that we're gonna have this beautifully organized freezer, and that it's like me having a clean TV room. It's like it starts out looking so beautiful, but once I get in there during football season, it's a mess. And it's the same thing with my freezer. I try to keep it pretty organized, but it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge to go in there and find what I need. Well, you know what? That can be actually pretty fun for kids. So the more they're in there helping you find things and pulling it out and opening up the bags, and then the next tip, helping to thaw them, again, the more they're making friends with the vegetable. So let's talk about thawing for a second. When you make the kids in charge of thawing, even a 2-year-old can do this. What you want to do is you want to take any frozen corn kernels or peas or whatever you happen to have, take them out of your container and just put them in a colander and run a little bit of cold, not hot, water over them. The kids can shake that colander under the water and they can keep testing little peas, little pieces of corn to see if they started to thaw. Now they're touching those. That's an easy process for any kid to do. If you want, though, you can also take the package itself and fill up a bowl of just room temperature water and have the kids dunk the package up and down, which they really love to do. If you have something a little bit with more substance like spinach, or I'll often put large leaves of kale. I've taken the stalk off, but I still have the large pieces of kale in there, then we chop after it thaws. That sort of thing works a little bit better with that process. So again, make the kids in charge of thawing the vegetable. And of course, cook with your kids. We all know that, right? I mean, it's what I'm all about. It's why I wrote Adventures in Veggieland, and it's what I teach in a lot of my courses. Even if you're not the best cook or you don't think that you are, doesn't matter. Get the kids in the kitchen with you so they experience these foods at the most basic level, but also because it's fun, because it's a great way to connect together, because you don't have electronics in front of you and you can talk, and the kids can practice their fine motor skills and their social skills as well. I wanted to mention too that when you're cooking with frozen vegetables, don't limit yourselves to casseroles or to soups. I think that's where we typically go to with frozen veggies, or we just serve them as a side with a little bit of butter and salt, which is fine. But for example, I'll give you a couple ideas here. I know a lot of you already have Adventures in Veggieland. This is always tricky for me to get to the camera. There we go. I wanted to mention that there's a recipe in here under the peas section. Every vegetable has 5 different recipes, including a veggie dessert. And when you get to the section on peas, use frozen peas for the Give Peas a Chance cake. It's the most moist, yummy, easy to make cake, and it has 2 cups of frozen peas in it. So one example, definitely there are some other yummy, icy examples like Choco broccoli pops, and gosh, there's a really good popsicle in there that has a variety of berries in it with a little bit of greens. There's red cherry ice cream, lots of different things that you can make with your kids. And they all include a vegetable. The cherry ice cream, by the way, includes red peppers mixed in with the cherries. But don't hesitate to get out frozen vegetables for things like making donuts. There's a corny donuts recipe in here that just pull out the corn kernels, thaw them really quick, and you can gently fold those into the batter as long as they're down to room temperature. So a great way to save money and a fun way to use the vegetables too with your kids. The other thing, of course, is to serve the vegetables frozen. I did this all the time with my kids when they were toddlers. They were always eating frozen peas, and we'd get the carrots, peas, and corn mix that comes in the bag. It's like 99 cents for a small bag of organic vegetable mix like that. And then put fun little toothpicks in there, or have the kids practice putting toothpicks in the small pieces and working on their fine motor skills. Now, if you're worried about itty-bitties, little toddlers maybe choking on something that's just too hard, that's a good concern. But, you know, take literally 10 seconds and thaw them, or just lay them out on a cookie sheet and they'll thaw pretty quickly, and then go ahead and poke your toothpick into it. The kids will be fine. When you're introducing frozen vegetables like this to a child's mouth, one of the things we have to be sure to teach is temperature. Let's talk about that for a second. When we're teaching kids about temperature, we always start with hot. You ever notice that? We always start with hot, danger. That stove is hot, don't touch. And pretty soon, the kids start to think that anything that has a little steam rising from it, like a nice warm bowl of macaroni and cheese with peas mixed in, that's hot. And little toddlers, the moment they sense any temperature change, they go, hot, hot, hot. You're like, no, it's warm. And they don't understand what that means. So from the very beginning, I like families to teach kids 4 different temperatures and tie in what I call an anchor word to those temperatures. So for sure, hot is going to be danger. Okay. Danger, hot. That's hot, danger. That's your approach. But when you talk about something being warm, then you're going to talk about, oh, it's nice and warm. Like your blankie out of the dryer. Give them something they can compare it to. Oh, it's nice and warm. Then the next time you present that macaroni and cheese with peas mixed in, you can say, oh, it's nice and warm. Same thing with cold. Ooh, it's nice and cold. Like when you're out on a hot summer day and you're sipping on some lemonade, or if you're really hot, you're at the swimming pool and the water is nice and cold, but it's not too cold. Oh, it's nice and cold. Let's get in. Let them understand that this is a pleasant sensation. Finally, frozen is still a pleasant sensation, but it's different than cold. So I usually combine it with the word brr for little kids. And I say, ooh, brr, they're frozen when I'm talking about popsicles or frozen peas, etc. So they know by the smile on my face that this is going to be a fun and pleasant experience, not a scary experience. Bonus tip for you, and then we'll get to questions. So be sure to type in your questions here. One of the things that I think families are most surprised about is when you go to freeze fresh vegetables, especially leafy greens. You can get a lot of vegetables out of one stalk of kale, for example. You can get a lot of servings, essentially. Let me walk you through what I mean. I was washing some kale from the garden the other day, and I pulled off the stalk of the dinosaur kale. And you know, that leaf is probably, I don't know, twice as big as my hand. It's pretty tall. But when I put it into my food processor and pulverized it into a really, really fine chop, do you know how many tablespoons of kale I got out of there? Two. And I thought about that and I thought, you know what though? The great thing about this is I can either put a bunch of that into a Ziploc bag and to squeeze all the air out of it so it freezes well, and then just reach in, grab a little chunk and add it to whatever. Or I can add that to an ice cube tray, pour a tiny bit of even olive oil on top and freeze it that way and add it to anything I'm cooking. I have a lot of kids that I work with who are totally fine with something like basil or oregano. So they're comfortable with, oh, a red sauce on a pizza because it's got a few little green flecks in there, or spaghetti sauce, or even a little bit of tomato soup that has minute little green flecks in it. Now, some of my kids can't handle that, but others are ready for that. I wouldn't be able to hand them a bunch of kale yet. So you know what I would do is make some spaghetti sauce or some tomato soup or pizza sauce, whatever it's going to be that they're used to seeing flecks of green in, and then have them take a scoop of this finely chopped kale. Remember, that's a whole leaf of kale in that tablespoon or so, and mix it into the sauce. Now they've got some yummy veggies in there. It looks just like the other. They know it's going in there, and they're part of the process of taking a frozen veggie and adding it to something familiar, because that's what this is always about. It's about building familiarity and making friends with vegetables, and that includes frozen. So I hope that gives you a few ideas about ways to include frozen vegetables in preparing foods and cooking with foods and really getting the kids in the kitchen and helping them learn to love frozen veggies too. Don't forget the veggie desserts, you know, mix those frozen veggies into smoothies, into popsicles, et cetera, et cetera.